A very good morning to all the students of class 12th political science. And students, as you know, we were doing the second chapter of your book, that is Contemporary World Politics, and the name of the chapter is The End of Bipolarity. And in the last video we had discussed some of the important factors all combined together, that why did the Soviet Union disintegrate. So we saw all the important factors in that. So, and also today we are going to discuss the consequences of disintegration, that after disintegration what were the consequences of that collapse of USSR after 1991. Okay, and also today we are going to discuss this particular topic. This is a new topic for you, and the name of the topic is, it's like a question, what is shock therapy. In this we will try to understand what do we understand by shock therapy, and how this term shock therapy is relevant to the disintegration of USSR. Also, after understanding the meaning of shock therapy, we'll see the consequences of shock therapy in the same video. So today we are going to cover these two topics in this particular chapter, on this particular video, I would say. Okay, so you can see we in the last video we had discussed that why did Soviet Union disintegrate, as after the Second World War that USSR was one of the two superpowers, and how can such a superpower disintegrate. So there were many important reasons and factors and causes which led to the collapse of such a big powerful nation. But again, after that collapse we have seen the factors, but now we need to understand what were the consequences of disintegration. That is, after USSR disintegrated in 1991, USSR disintegrated. So what were the consequences on the world politics? So what are the system and or mechanism of the world politics, how it changed after the disintegration of USSR? We are going to discuss that particular events in this. So it is very simple and you will be easily able to understand, but you have to keep in mind while you are writing the answers. So if there will be a question for 4 marks or maybe for 5 marks, that what were the consequences of the disintegration of USSR at the world politics. Okay, so you'll have to mention these 6 points, although I have written in short form, but you will have to explain them in detail. And this all we have studied in the previous first chapter, and the second chapter till now, how the content we have covered, it is a part of the same thing. That is why it is a consequences. So let's see. First is end of the Cold War. So this is very much understood to you. Why we are saying end of Cold War? Because Cold War was the situation of tension, conflict, and disturbance between the two superpowers, that is USSR and US. But since we are saying USSR disintegrated or collapsed, or it was buried in 1991, so after that only one superpower was left, that is US. So it means there was an end of Cold War. There was no more rivalries between these two states. Okay. Now, the second one, the US became the sole superpower. This is also totally relevant to this Cold War. If USSR disintegrated, it means US was the sole superpower. It means US and USSR. These two are into Cold War. But since I am saying USSR disintegrated in 1991, if it disintegrated, it was finished. Now only one superpower was left, that is US. That is why I'm saying the world after 1991 was having the sole superpower, and that was US. And also, if US was the sole superpower, it was dominating and influencing all the political, economic activities around the world. It was most dominant. That is why its ideology, that was capitalism, became more dominant all over the world. It means most of the allies of US was already following the ideology of capitalism. Since USSR disintegrated, it means it proved that capitalism was the best system to follow a particular political or social life. So this was the best system which was proved. Now, end of Soviet bloc. Countries were having independent aspirations to govern. Now that bloc means that group, the countries which were following the ideology of socialism, that group was dissolved now, that disintegrated, and all the members of that bloc now were independent. And as we saw that after disintegration they formed a group, that was Commonwealth of independent state. CIS we have studied. So now all the countries were independent, they were sovereign, they had independent aspirations, desires and needs, and accordingly they followed the ideology of capitalism. So the end of Soviet bloc, which led the impact, what was the impact of this end of this Soviet bloc? There were many independent countries and they had own aspirations to govern themselves. Now the next thing which will conclude the content you already know, ideology of liberal democracy, that is the ideology of capitalism and liberal democracy that was followed by the US and its allies, its partners. So it means liberal democracy emerged as the best way to organize political life. If we have to organize our political life, social life or cultural life or economic life, it means liberal democracy was the best option instead of socialism or communalism, because we have seen the negative sides or the negative impact of socialism which led to the disintegration of USSR. So automatically it was understood that liberal democracy was the best way or to have or organize a political life of the people. And of course people had the desire to have democracy, which was absent in under USSR. Now the other important content you can see here is the World Bank and International Monetary Fund (IMF) emerged at this moment when there was a disintegration or collapse of USSR. At this moment, these two international bodies, World Bank and International Monetary Fund, in short we call it IMF generally, these two international organizations emerged as a helping hand to the countries which disintegrated from USSR. As we know, USSR was a group of 14 countries plus Russia. So when they disintegrated, all these countries became independent. So the helping hand was given by World Bank and IMF. So financial help to these countries, these 15 countries, financial help was given by this International Monetary Fund and World Bank. Which type of financial help? Because most of these countries were making a transaction from socialism and communalism type of economy to a capitalist economy, and to make such a sudden change they needed lot of economic help, and that economic help was provided to them by World Bank and IMF. Okay, so here they emerged. So with that we have come to end with these six important parts which are important as when we read the consequences of a disintegration. Also I will be reading it from your NCERT book also, but the conclusion and the most important notes are these 6 points only which we have to study in that particular topic. Just now I'm not reading it from your book, I'm taking the other topic, that is the shock therapy, and the end of that video I shall be reading the content of consequences of disintegration from your book also. So after the consequences of disintegration, we have finished one of the important topic of this second chapter, that is why did Soviet Union disintegrate, its consequences, and what were the factors for its disintegration. So almost 2 or 3 important questions which are very important from the exam point of view, we have covered that. Okay, so the next thing is next question which we are taking today, and it is the last topic or the second last topic of your NCERT book. What is shock therapy? Okay, so we are starting with the definition. What do we mean by shock therapy? It's written here: a painful process of transition from an authoritarian socialist system to a democratic capitalist system. It means it is a process after the disintegration of USSR, that is after 1991, when USSR disintegrated. So the 15 countries or the 14 countries which were the part of this union, they wanted to have shift from this socialist system to a capitalist system. It means they wanted to make a transition from this old Soviet system to a new capitalist system, and this transition period is only called as shock therapy. The painful, because it was very painful, because the outcomes were not good enough. We could see many negative impact on the society, on the republics of USSR, when they were making a transition from a socialist system to a democratic capitalist system. They wanted to change their system within a night, within a day. They wanted to completely transform them as a capitalist state, but it had many negative impact on the republics. That is why we call it shock therapy. See the definition: a painful process of transaction. It is a process of transaction moving from a socialist society, socialist ideology to a capitalist world, from an authoritarian socialist system to a democratic capitalist system. Okay, so let's move forward. Again, it's the same thing. The model of transaction, shock therapy, it is a model of transaction from an authoritarian socialist system to a democratic capitalist system in Russia, basically in Russia, Central Asia and East Europe. In maps I have always again and again shown you, in the class also when we were having the regular classes, I had shown you the location of Russia, Central Asian countries, East Europe. These all parts were a part of USSR. So all these places, all these locations and republics were making a transaction from an authoritarian socialist society. And you know the meaning of authoritarian socialist society, we have discussed it. And they were making a transaction from this type of society to a democratic capitalist system, which was followed by US. So since these Russia, Central Asia and East European countries were making a transaction under the influence, and who were helping them? World Bank and IMF. This I have already told you in the previous consequences also. So under their influence, that IMF and World Bank promised them that they will financially help all the republics to make a transaction from a socialist society to a capitalist society. So under the influence of IMF and World Bank, the socialist countries under USSR now were trying to make a transaction from this particular old society or the old ideology to a capitalist ideology. So now the question must be arising in your mind, and why we are calling it a shock therapy? Because it had a very negative impact on the society. For example, we could see a word here, largest garage sale. So what do you understand by largest garage sale? So it was a result due to the shock therapy. When these republics were making a transaction from a socialist ideology to a capitalist ideology, it resulted into a shock therapy to undervalue the valuable industries. The value of the industries which were run by the government, they were undervalued and sold away at the throwaway prices. It means the industries which were there under the government, under the Communist Party during USSR survived, but after its disintegration, those valuable industries, they were very valuable and important industries, those industries were sold at throwaway prices. It means at very cheap prices those industries were sold. That is why we say large garage sale of the history. In history we call it largest garage sale. Okay, now we are coming to this part, effect of shock therapy. It means consequences of shock therapy. Okay, when this transaction has taken place and there were many negative impact on the society, that is why we are calling it shock therapy. This transaction was not as smooth as people had assumed to be. So there were a lot of problems when they were making a transaction from a socialist world to a capitalist world or a capitalist society. It looked easy, but when practically they worked on it, there were a lot of problems. Like we have seen here, largest garage sale, where the industries of USSR, which were very much valuable and important for USSR, now they were sold at throwaway prices with the coming of capitalism. Okay, now let's see what were the other important consequences on the economy and people. What was the impact of this shock therapy on the people and economy? Largest garage sales, the first is largest garage sale of history, as we have seen here also up here. 90% of the USSR industries were sold to private individuals. Now as I told you, now there was capitalism, they followed capitalism. It means there was now private ownership. So now most of the state government industries, now they were sold to the private individuals and company at throwaway prices. This was one of the important consequences, negative consequence on the industries. Ruble, as you know, ruble is the currency of USSR. The ruble currency of Russia, especially Russia, as Russia was the most dominant, the ruble currency of Russia declined dramatically. So when they were making a transaction, so their value had declined a lot. The value of the currency had dramatically declined. Inflation went too high that the people lost their savings. Inflation, it means महंगाई. In the inflation and the prices of the consumer goods went so high that people were had already saved something for them, okay, but they lost all their savings for purchasing the basic goods of their necessities and use of every day. Okay, so inflation. So these are some of the impact that what were the things happening in the society once there was the transaction was made from a socialist society to a capitalist society. These were the changes which were occurring in the society now. Russia GDP went down. The gross domestic product of Russia went very down. Government withdrew subsidies and social welfare was discarded. Now government withdrew the subsidies. There were various subsidies, as we had discussed earlier also when we were talking about the Soviet society, what kind of Soviet society was there. So there were many subsidies given for health, child care, education, for the people, for the poor people basically. So all that subsidies were withdrawn. Social welfare activities were stopped. There were no developmental activities going on. Everything was discarded. This when the government had stopped all this, because now privatization was coming up, so this pushed large public to a poverty. So large number of people were pushed into poverty because the support of the government was over and privatization was started now. So when there was the withdrawal of subsidies and social welfare of the government, when they withdrew all the powers and support to the people, at this point of time there emerged mafia and controlled economic activities. Okay, so now the mafia emerged and tried to control all the economic activities, which led to the increase in the crime rate. Now the crime had started because now government was not interfering in any of the activities, economic, political, social activities. So there emerged some important people, those are called the mafia, and they were controlling all the economic activities by the unfair means, and lot of crime rate had increased in this time period. And at the same time, half of Russia's bank and other financial institution went bankrupt, means they were having no money, no currency. So all the Russian banks and other financial institutions all were bankrupt. So half of the Russia's bank and other financial institutions were bankrupt. So these were one or some of the important consequences which will be important if there comes a question that what do you understand by shock therapy and what were the consequences of shock therapy. So you will have to mention the definition of shock therapy, that is a this definition you can mention here: the model of transition from authoritarian socialist system to a democratic capitalist system in Russia, Central Asia and East Europe under the influence of the World Bank and IMF. This is called, and this painful process, this was a painful process of transition from an authoritarian socialist system to a democratic capitalist system. Okay, and these are the consequences which we have discussed here. This is the last topic of this chapter, that is the second chapter, but there are many additional topics also which we will doing after this. But if we talk about NCERT book, this is the last topic which we are doing. And topic before this, the name of the topic was, let me see, it was tensions and conflicts, okay, amongst the post-Soviet republics. That topic has been removed, so I shall be sending you the new syllabus also, so that you can start studying according to the syllabus now. So in the second chapter, apart from the books topics mentioned in the second chapter, some topics from the third chapter and some new topics have been added to the second chapter according to the new revised syllabus. I shall be forwarding you that. But let's finish this part: India and the post-communist countries. So we are trying to see the relation of India with the post-communist countries here. So India had maintained a good relation. So India had maintained a good relation with all of the post-communist countries. Post-communist countries means the countries which were in the Union of USSR. So after disintegration, India had a good relations with all of them. But India's strongest and the best friendly relations are still, and that time also, and still with Russia. Okay. Russia and India share a vision of multipolar world order, collective security. So when it comes to the relationship between Russia and India, they almost share the same views at the world level, at the global activities, or at the United Nations. Like they promote some vision of multipolar world. They think that there should not be unipolar world. Power should be divided and distributed among various members. That the US was the unipolar, but their vision was the world should be multipolar. collective security, negotiated settlements of international conflict. Whenever there are international conflicts, they try to negotiate. They do not want to come directly into war. And independent foreign policy, both have independent foreign policy, decision making through UN, so they have a very good participation at the United Nations also. So together they make a good team, and they cooperate with each other at every step. So India is benefited from Russia. So how India is benefited from Russia? On the issue of Kashmir. When it comes to the issue of Kashmir, Russia always supports India. Energy supplies. India get lot of energy supplies from Russia. Sharing information on international terrorism. When it comes to terrorism, Russia always supports and shares lot of information with India regarding terrorism. And when it comes now in return, Russia has also been benefited. What is the benefit to Russia for helping India? So and Russia gets lot of largest second largest arm market for Russia. So India is the second largest arm market for Russia. It means all the manufactured arms, ammunitions, arsenals for military have been purchased by India through Russia. So this is the relation between, and in many chapters we will be discussing more about the relation between Russia and India. Okay, in the next chapters we have a topic. So with this we come to the end of this particular part, but I shall be continuing the second chapter again, but not from your NCERT book. Those are the additional topics. For that I shall be giving you notes also, and also I will be sending you the new syllabus. Till then, thank you and take care.